I love Thanksgiving. It's a little early, I know. But every year, November comes, and all I can think about is Thanksgiving. I'm going to see my family soon. We're going to get to have turkey and cranberry sauce and green beans and sweet potatoes and pies. There was the year I almost got stopped by TSA for bringing too many pies back. I didn't know they're considered a liquid. For another day. I just love Thanksgiving. My family, we used to take over my Aunt Vanessa and my Uncle Allan's restaurant, the River Sage in Evergreen, Colorado, and we'd smoosh all the tables together. That was years. And then there were years when we'd gather at my grandparents' dining room, which they had this massive mirror, which was fun as a kid to make faces at yourself during the meal. I love Thanksgiving. And then 4 years ago, I loved Thanksgiving even more when Solomon surprised me and proposed to me during Thanksgiving, and we got to celebrate our engagement with family. And then 3 years ago, Thanksgiving was just reveling in the incredible blessing of getting to celebrate our wedding with all of you, with our beloved community. And this year, I can't even say it, this year, every time I think of Thanksgiving, I just cry with tears of joy, because after months and months of infertility purgatory, I get to go home with Peavy, what we're calling our little one, who's coming this spring. So just Thanksgiving has never been sweeter. I was looking for something to watch the other day, scrolling through Hulu, and came across Padma Lakshmi's show, Taste the Nation. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving, Hulu suggested I watch an episode filmed right here on Martha's Vineyard called The Truth and the Turkey Tale. I love all things Thanksgiving, so I was in. I started watching. It was the most amazing episode. Padma interviews Native American Wampanoag chefs and teachers and advocates about the history of their people, about the daily struggles they endure to access basic resources, to access the rights that are granted to them by law, and about how they experience Thanksgiving, a holiday in which millions of Americans gather to eat what turns out to be traditional Wampanoag foods, without acknowledging that the foods we eat and the lands that we eat those foods upon belong to their people not so long ago. Turns out that the Thanksgiving story we learned about in school, that probably is still taught today in schools, isn't the real one. When the Pilgrims arrived in the early 1600s, the Wampanoag people, the Native Americans who lived here in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, had just been decimated by diseases brought over by white colonists. 1619 was the end of the period called the Great Death, where nearly 2/3 of the almost 100,000 Wampanoag were killed by disease. At that time, the Wampanoag Nation was trying to figure out how to survive with so many of their people gone. They watched the Pilgrims struggle. They didn't know how to farm the land. They didn't know how to hunt. They didn't know how to live on this land, and so they strategized that maybe, just maybe, if they taught the Pilgrims how to survive here, maybe in exchange the Pilgrims would help protect them against neighboring tribes who wanted to come in and steal their lands. The Pilgrims were glad to learn, but they never really saw them as equals. In 1621, when they sat down to celebrate the first time they had enough to eat, the bounty of their harvest, they didn't think to invite their Wampanoag teachers who had enabled that delicious meal. They also didn't think about what might happen when they fired muskets of celebration. They didn't consider what that might sound like to their neighbors. The Wampanoags heard all those gunfire and freaked out, worrying that there was a battle, that there was a war going on. And so 100 warriors gathered up their weapons and rushed over, intending to protect them, only to discover they were just having a party. So they brought over some food and joined in. That was the first meal of Thanksgiving, so to speak. It wasn't some beautiful celebration of togetherness, not some kumbaya moment, it just a weird dinner party with some gunfire. The first official holiday of Thanksgiving didn't happen until 15 years later. Governor John Winthrop of Massachusetts declared a feast of Thanksgiving when white colonial armies returned safely after massacring 600 Pequot in Connecticut. The holiday was forgotten after that until 1789, when George Washington brought it back in his first year of the presidency, thinking it would be a good tool to boost our military morale. Again, the holiday was short-lived. It wasn't until 1863, in the midst of a brutal civil war, that President Abraham Lincoln issued his Thanksgiving proclamation and declared Thanksgiving a national holiday, in the hopes that celebrating gratitude, celebrating this ancient truce, this ancient meal where peoples that had every reason to hate each other, to distrust each other, to fight, got together and had a beautiful meal, that could unite our country. Watching this show, I felt a little embarrassed. I mean, I know this history, at least roughly. I knew this history. I knew that the myth of Thanksgiving was just that, a myth, designed to disguise the pain of colonialization, designed to hide the brokenness of the start of our nation. I knew that this idea that Native Americans welcomed us with open arms and wanted to share food with us and wanted to share their land with us, that was an idea designed to justify our presence here. And more than that this holiday of Thanksgiving perpetuates the idea that it doesn't matter what happened then, it doesn't matter. Just everybody sit down and have a nice meal together, it's great. Everything's fine. But something shifted for me when I heard Wampanoag testimony. On the show and then in various articles I read afterwards, I heard Wampanoag people talking about the compound pain they experience. It's not just that their lands were stolen then. It's not just that their people were massacred then. It's not just that their children were taken away, were sent to boarding schools where they were stripped of their identity, their culture, their language. It's not just that they were persecuted then. It's that now it feels like no one sees them. It feels like no one acknowledges their pain. And so they're left bearing the grief that their suffering is unacknowledged, that too few people see what happened then, what continues to happen now, and the impact that has on them and on their future. I sat there listening to this testimony and thinking to myself, I have something I can relate to in this. I know what I feel like when I hear of someone who denies the Holocaust. I know what I feel like when someone says anti-Semitism isn't a big deal. That hurts. That hurts even though we have this miracle of history in which we have been able to go back to our ancestral homeland. We have Israel. We don't just have Israel, we have the ADL. We don't just have the ADL, we have the word anti-Semitism. We have a concept of hatred against Jews. We have a world which, after the genocide of our people, acknowledges that that's not okay. yeah, we're still fighting against anti-Semitism, but there's a general sense that that's something everyone should fight against. Somehow I'd never translated my own experience, my own pain, and never considered what it must be like for Native Americans this time of year when we all just gather around and have our happy meals and don't talk about their suffering and don't talk about their pain. Somehow, in my own love of this holiday, I had prioritized my joy, my family, my meal over the feelings of an entire people. By rights, I shouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving. I should boycott. I should instead go and do the Day of Mourning, which is held every year here on Thanksgiving. And call me a hypocrite, I probably am. I don't want to give up completely on what Thanksgiving has become, what it could be. So this year, after lots of conversation, Solomon and I are thinking about a tweak. A tweak in the hopes that there's a way to have our cake and eat it too, to celebrate Thanksgiving, but also to acknowledge the great pain that that one meal created. Before we fly to Colorado, we're sending a donation to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. They are looking for resources to help them as they recover their native language, as they continue to teach their culture, to support their lands, to support their people. That doesn't quite feel like enough. As Jews, we uphold a tradition that values complexity. Our sacred texts share the stories of our ancestors, not just their successes, not just the moments in which they are admirable, but also the moments in which they are challenged, in which they struggle, in which they miss the mark. We read about Abraham in his great faith, advocating, challenging God, save them, save them, save, and even as we watch him, ignoring the plight of his own child and partner. We read about Joseph who single-handedly saved all of Egypt from famine. And then we read about Joseph using famine, using the resources he had secured to take resources away from the Egyptians, to impoverish Egyptians and to enrich the coffers of Israelites. We can hold these complexities. And those complexities don't weaken our celebration of our ancestors, they actually strengthen us. And so this year we're bringing a new story to the table for Thanksgiving. We're bringing the history that I learned this year, bringing the conversation. How do we look at this holiday with honest eyes? How do we uphold the beauty of gratitude and at the same time the pain of brokenness? And at our table, we're going to talk about what we can do, how we can use the food that we will eat to fuel us to do justice, to fuel us to heal this broken world. At the end of the episode, The Truth and the Turkey Tale, Padma gathers around a big table with all of the Wampanoag chefs and teachers and advocates. They're sharing a Thanksgiving feast. They start with a prayer. Creator, we thank you for all things. Ancestors, we thank you for all gifts given us. We thank you for this beautiful food, for our wonderful family and friends who have come here. Time to eat. They dig in. And you hear Padma saying, as you watch them eating this delicious food, for Thanksgiving to be an all-American holiday, Thanksgiving needs to consider all Americans, especially Indigenous Americans. We didn't make this holiday. We didn't colonize this land. We didn't subjugate Native Americans. We didn't consciously ignore their story, their truth, their history. But we have a chance today to redeem that pain. We We have a chance today to lift up their story, to empathize, to give resources, and to commit ourselves to working for the kind of world for which everyone, every single American can give thanks. Shabbat Shalom.